My name is Ethan Marks, 54 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I was the quiet constant behind the tech operations at Vanguard Solutions in Cleveland. Senior Systems Analyst, although titles never meant much to me. What mattered was that I kept everything running, from the dusty dial-up servers to the sleek cloud infrastructure we migrated to. 3 CEOs had come and gone, but I remained, solving problems, working weekends, skipping holidays, always saying yes when no one else would. Then came Monday morning. I was halfway through my first coffee when I got the message. Leon needs to see you in his office. Now, that tone, I'd heard it before, back when we laid off half the support team during the last merger. I knew something was off the moment I walked in and saw Sasha from HR already seated. Leon didn't even look me in the eyes. Ethan, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position, he said flatly. Please clean out your desk by the end of the day. No warning, no discussion, just a bullet to the chest, masked as corporate policy. I nodded once. Understood. Not another word. No protest. No pleading. I just stood, adjusted my sleeves, and walked out of that office like a man headed into battle. I passed by the open workstations, kids half my age, heads down, pretending not to notice. Most of them I'd trained myself. Good people, but they didn't understand the code layered 3 systems deep or the admin pathways built before cloud tools made everything look simple. They didn't know that I'd quietly become the backbone of that building. And now, they were watching it walk out the door. Back at my desk, I began packing the essentials. A framed photo of my daughter in her cap and gown, the cracked coffee mug she'd made in ceramics class, and a stubborn little cactus that somehow survived 17 years of stale fluorescent lighting. Bethany from marketing stopped by, her voice tight with disbelief. Ethan, I just heard. This is insane. You built this place. I gave her a tired smile. Companies change. But with no warning, she asked, voice rising. After everything you've done. It's fine, I said quietly. It wasn't. But I wasn't going to unravel in front of her. Or anyone. As I headed for the elevators, I caught a glimpse of Leon standing outside his office, watching me. No handshake. No goodbye. Just surveillance. Like he was making sure the body stayed dead. They had no idea. They didn't know that every piece of infrastructure in that building carried my fingerprints. That I had designed the audit protocols. That I'd archived every system modification for legal, compliance, and my own peace of mind. I wasn't exceptional because I was flashy. I was essential because I was thorough. I walked out of that 12-story building for what they thought was the last time, dropped my ID badge in the tray, and stepped into the parking lot sunlight. I started the engine, looked up at the company's logo one last time, and whispered to myself, Wednesday will be fun. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long time, engine off, keys in hand, staring through the windshield like I'd just stepped out of a war zone. The silence was louder than the noise had ever been. After 17 years of being the first one in and the last one out, I suddenly had nowhere to be. Inside the house, my wife Andrea took one look at me and didn't say a word. She just set a mug of coffee on the kitchen counter and placed a hand on my shoulder before walking away. 19 years of marriage had taught her to recognize that look. I'm going to the store, she said after a moment. Need anything? I shook my head. Once the door shut behind her, I went into my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out a small metal flash drive. On the surface, it looked ordinary, nothing but plastic and brushed aluminum. But inside was everything. You see, years ago, during a potential insider threat scare, I'd built an internal auditing system that required off-site backups. Legal had signed off, and then promptly forgotten. I hadn't. I kept copies, not to hurt the company, but to protect it, and maybe, in the end, protect myself. I plugged the drive into my personal laptop and waited. My screen came alive with folders. System logs. Archived access records. Financial activity reports. The kind of files that most employees didn't even know existed. That's when I started digging. Within minutes, I found them again. The same suspicious vendor transactions I'd noticed before everything went sideways. Nova Core systems. Payments had started small. $1,500 here. $2,000 there. But over time, they'd grown. 10, 20, even 30,000 at a time. 18 months. Nearly $1.8 million. I cross-referenced the vendor registration. Nova Core was linked to a strip mall UPS store. The listed owner? Thomas Dalton, the CFO's brother-in-law. So that's why they'd wanted me gone. Leon hadn't just restructured. He'd removed the only person with full visibility into the company's digital infrastructure, the one person who might recognize what was happening and sound the alarm. And the consultant, Trevor Shields, the one they brought in months ago, his contract had bypassed standard procurement channels entirely. They thought I'd disappear quietly, fade into the background like old hardware. They forgot I'd spent nearly 2 decades watching every system, every breach, every attempt to cut corners. They forgot that I didn't just build those defenses, I was the defense. My phone buzzed. A text from Steven, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored. Sorry about what happened. Shields is already in your office. Total BS, man. I stared at the message for a moment, then replied simply, don't get involved. Just watch. Because I wasn't done. They may have cut my badge, but they hadn't cut my access. And by Wednesday, they'd realized the real mistake they made wasn't firing me. It was underestimating me. The next morning, I woke up with no alarm, no schedule, no inbox flooded with urgent tickets. But my mind was far from still. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at my desk, and opened the files again. Every line of code, every transaction log, every shadow buried beneath the polished corporate surface. What had started as a gut feeling had morphed into something far more dangerous. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was a full-blown internal operation. The payments to NovaCore systems had been cleverly disguised, routed through routine software licensing renewals. The invoices looked clean, even referenced actual products we used. But the amounts? Inflated, quietly bloated just enough to avoid triggering alarms. 15% here, 20% there. Enough to add up without anyone noticing, except someone like me. Someone who remembered how every dollar flowed before this streamlining began. Then I checked system access logs. That's where the real rot showed. 18 months ago, right when the NovaCore payments started, Greg Dalton, our CFO, had requested elevated administrative access to the financial approval system. It had been granted with a single approval, one I had logged, one I now had proof of. That afternoon, I went to my local bank and opened the safe deposit box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an older backup drive, one I hadn't included in my routine rotations. It contained copies of original security protocols I wrote myself, with access trails, timestamped records, and every email confirming what permissions had been changed and by whom. The deeper I went, the more names surfaced. Greg's access overlapped perfectly with the suspicious transactions. But there was more, emails that hinted at project timelines, cost manipulations, vague consulting charges tied to Blue Wave Consulting. That name had never crossed my desk while I was employed. Yet here it was, pulling thousands of dollars in service fees for IT integration support. I looked it up. Another shell company. The listed CEO? Patricia Dalton, Greg's wife. 2 fake vendors. 2 direct family links. And one constant pattern. Overcharging for services that either didn't exist or were never fully rendered. A quiet siphoning operation, masked beneath corporate buzzwords and plausible deniability. And somehow, Leon, the same man who cut me loose with a straight face, had conveniently overlooked all of it. Or worse, facilitated it. I leaned back in my chair as the sun sank outside the window. My house, once filled with the dull hum of evening routine, now felt like a war room. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Steven. Something's up. Everyone's tense. They pulled your access retroactively, even historical files. Too late. I'd already made my copies. Already connected the dots. I replied, simply, let them lock the doors. I built the exits. This wasn't about getting my job back. This wasn't about ego or revenge. It was about exposing the rot they thought they could hide behind paywalls, passwords, and plausible deniability. Wednesday was no longer the beginning. It was going to be the reckoning. Wednesday morning arrived clear and cold. I parked across the street from Vanguard's headquarters, watching employees trickle through the revolving doors like nothing was wrong. Maybe for them, it wasn't. But for the people sitting in those glass-walled offices on the top floor, today was the beginning of their unraveling. In the passenger seat, my laptop was open, logged into a ghost email account I had created years ago for system testing. It looked internal, appeared legitimate, but it wasn't traceable through the company's primary directory. I'd used it to simulate phishing attacks, penetration tests, system audits. Now, it had a new purpose. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I sent my first message. Subject line, financial irregularities, urgent review needed. Recipient, Leon Harris. I kept the content simple. A high-level summary of the Apex-like vendor payments, inflated invoices, timeline alignment with recent budget shifts. I left out the family connections. If Leon was involved, it would cause panic. If he wasn't, it would force him to investigate. Either way, I'd stirred the nest. By 9:45, my phone rang. Leon's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Ethan, we need to talk immediately. I got your email. Call me. I didn't. Instead, I relocated to a quiet coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over, sipped black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, and waited. At 10:30, my inbox pinged again. New message. This time from Sasha in HR. Mr. Marks, we've received communication from you that may violate your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Vanguard employees. Further communication could result in legal action. That was cute. I hadn't signed a separation agreement. They'd walked me out before I could even read one. Now they were trying to scare me. Threaten, dismiss, isolate. But I wasn't some disgruntled employee tossing wild accusations. I had the receipts, and I hadn't even shown my full hand yet. Around noon, I returned to my safe deposit box and retrieved a sealed envelope, my ace in the hole. It contained documentation they'd hoped no one still had. Access logs, chain of command approvals, internal communications, some of which I never should have had, but no one questioned a guy in IT who quietly fixed everything. As I drove back home, my phone lit up with more missed calls. Leon, Sasha, and now, Trevor Shields. That surprised me. I hadn't expected the consultant to get involved so quickly. Maybe they'd already started realizing how deep this would go. When I got home, there was a message from Steven. Jake, they're freaking out. People are whispering. Shields called an emergency meeting. They're saying you sent something big to leadership. What's happening? I didn't answer his question. I didn't need to. Stay out of it, Steven. Just keep your head down. Watch. Because now the clock had started ticking. And they weren't chasing a ghost. They were chasing me. I wasn't hiding. I was just waiting for the right moment. And that moment would come soon, when the truth would hit not just their inboxes, but the boardroom. When this house of cards would finally collapse. And I'd be holding the blueprint of how it was built and how it would fall. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by paper trails, old flash drives, backup logs, pieces of a puzzle that had taken years to construct and only days to fully expose. Every folder I opened brought me closer to the truth. And what I found next, it confirmed what I had already suspected. NovaCore Systems was just the tip of the iceberg. Months before the first NovaCore payment appeared, another vendor had slipped onto our books, Blue Wave Consulting. I hadn't noticed it before, buried beneath innocuous line items and vague expense codes. But the pattern was identical. Consistent payments, gradually increasing, tied to supposed strategic infrastructure planning. I traced the payments, cross-referenced the approvals, and finally pulled the registration record. The listed CEO? Patricia Dalton, Greg Dalton's wife. My jaw tightened. 2 shell companies. 2 family members. 2 streams of dirty money bleeding from the company's financial arteries, dressed up to look like innovation. And the best part? These weren't ghost services. They were built atop legitimate expenses. Real software licenses. Real consulting terms. Just inflated, twisted, manipulated beyond recognition. It was elegant, devious, and completely traceable. I started connecting names. Greg's fingerprints were all over the payment approvals. Leon's department had quietly received significant budget increases during the same period, while other departments faced cuts and hiring freezes. Coincidence? Not likely. Then came Trevor Shields. His consultancy had been hired through a backdoor process, skipping procurement protocols entirely. I combed through system logs, and there it was. He had been given full administrative privileges within 2 days of arriving. That wasn't onboarding. That was enabling. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. They hadn't brought Trevor in to modernize IT. They brought him in to erase me. I was the last wall standing. The only one who understood every endpoint, every workaround, every embedded system too old to survive without someone who knew how it worked. And they knew once I was out of the picture, no one would question inflated budgets or suspicious transfers. Not until it was far too late. But I was still here. And I had everything. That night, I compiled a comprehensive report. Spreadsheets of every vendor payment, approval logs, internal emails, even social media profiles linking the Daltons to the fake companies. I attached source code from the original auditing software I'd written, showing exact timestamps of access level changes tied directly to Greg and Trevor. Then, I picked up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't go to the press. I called Alan Kim, a board member I hadn't spoken to in years, back from when I helped install the company's first security framework. He answered on the second ring. Ethan? Wow. Long time. Alan, I need 15 minutes. That's all. His pause told me everything. This about why Greg and Leon have been looking like ghosts in yesterday's board meeting? I smiled. It's exactly about that. We agreed to meet the next morning. Neutral ground. Because I wasn't looking for headlines or vengeance. I just wanted the right people to know what had been happening under their noses. And I wanted them to hear it from the man they thought they erased. The next morning, I met Alan Kim in a quiet park 3 miles from Vanguard headquarters. He was already there, sitting on a weathered bench beneath a sycamore tree, a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck despite the warming sun. I handed him a sealed envelope and a flash drive. This is everything, I said. Names, numbers, timestamps, vendor connections. It's all in there. Alan took the envelope without a word and slid it into his coat. He looked at me long and hard. Are you looking to come back? He asked finally. No, I said. I'm not looking for anything. I just want the truth to land where it belongs. He gave a slow nod. You always were the guy who knew where the bodies were buried. I smiled faintly. I didn't bury them. I just watched them dig. That afternoon, I received 2 job offers from rival firms, both higher paying than what I'd earned at Vanguard, both offering immediate signing bonuses. Word was spreading. The quiet guy in the server room was suddenly very loud. But I wasn't ready to move on. Not yet. That night, as the city lights blinked on, I sat at my kitchen table with Andrea. I told her everything. What I'd found, what I'd done, what was coming next. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, one hand on mine. So what now, she asked. Now we see what they do when the light hits them. I spent the rest of the night building one final file. This one was different. It wasn't just documentation. It was a summary, a story, a clear, concise map of how $5.2 million had been siphoned through 2 shell companies, both tied to the CFO's family. How Leon had received budget boosts in exchange for silence. How Trevor's consulting deal had been rigged from the beginning. At exactly 8 a.m. Friday, I scheduled an automated email to every member of Vanguard's board. Subject line: before you approve Q2 bonuses, please read. Attached, the entire report. Then I waited. At 8:17, the first call started. Unrecognized numbers. Board members' assistants. I let them all go to voicemail. At 9 a.m., the Emergency Finance Committee meeting began. Alan would be there, watching them react in real time. At 9:32, a message from Stephen lit up my phone. Police just arrived. Wilcox and Leon being questioned in conference rooms. Shields looks like he's about to throw up. What did you do? I didn't respond. By 10 o'clock, I got a call from Patricia Graves, Vanguard's general counsel. Mr. Marks, we need you to come in immediately to discuss the information you've provided. I'm available by phone, I replied. This really requires. No, it doesn't, I said, cutting her off. Everything I know is in the report. Everything I have is backed up in secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, copies go to the SEC, IRS, and 3 newsrooms. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted. The board is taking this extremely seriously. Several executives have already been placed on leave. I've done my part, I said. The rest is up to you. I hung up and left the house. Not to run, not to hide, but to watch the tower they tried to bury me under begin to crumble, one piece at a time. By early afternoon, the first headlines began to surface. Vanguard Technologies executives under internal investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet. No details. But the walls were cracking. At 2:03 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Alan Kim. It's a bloodbath, he said, skipping any pleasantries. Greg Wilcox confessed. The moment we showed him the data, he cracked. He's throwing Leon under the bus, claiming he was pressured into it. And Leon, denying everything. Of course. Says he was unaware of any financial misconduct. Claims all approvals were standard protocol. And Shields. Alan chuckled bitterly. Says he was just a consultant, had no knowledge of financial details. Board's not buying it. We've suspended all three, pending legal review. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated even. But all I felt was still. They estimate at least $4.5 million was siphoned off over 3 years, Alan continued. Could be more. Forensic accountants are going in Monday. He paused. The board wants to meet with you. Not just to thank you. They're creating a new position. Chief Security Officer. Direct line to the board. No red tape. Full authority over system integrity, financial oversight, and vendor vetting. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or shake my head. It was almost poetic. I'll think about it, I said quietly. That evening, Andrea and I sat on the porch. I told her everything. Again, but this time it was about what they were offering. She sipped her tea, stared out at the quiet street where we'd raised 2 kids and built a quiet life. Do you want to go back? She asked, her voice gentle. I was quiet for a long time. I don't know, I admitted. The people who tossed me out are gone. The corruption's exposed. But walking back into that place. She nodded, understanding. That version of me, the one who stayed late, never complained, kept things running while others took credit. He's not going back, I added. Then maybe this time, you return as someone new, she said. Someone they can't overlook. I didn't respond. I just watched the sun dip low across the rooftops. Later that night, I opened my old LinkedIn profile, which had gathered dust for years. I posted a single sentence. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. Within minutes, messages flooded in. Former colleagues, rival companies, even a few board members. But I didn't respond. Not yet. This wasn't about fame or ego. It never had been. It was about setting something right. Quietly. Precisely. Completely. They had underestimated the man in the server room. The guy who smiled, fixed the printer, stayed silent during meetings, and always seemed to blend into the background. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I was watching the whole time. And when the time came, I didn't yell. I documented. I waited. And then, when everything lined up, I struck. Not out of vengeance, but out of purpose. Because some bridges aren't meant to be burned. Some are meant to be rebuilt, stronger, steel reinforced, and led by the one person they never saw coming. Monday morning, I walked back into Vanguard's headquarters wearing a suit I hadn't touched in years. The lobby was quieter than usual, almost reverent. The security guard looked up from his desk, eyes widening slightly when he recognized me. "Welcome back, Mr. Marks," he said, with a nod I hadn't seen in 17 years. He handed me a visitor badge, but it wouldn't be temporary for long. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt surreal. I'd spent my entire career a few stories below, hidden behind blinking servers and patch cables. Now, I was heading to the boardroom. This time not to fix something, but to lead. Inside, 10 board members sat at a long table polished to a mirror's shine. At the center was the interim CEO, Karen Delgado, formerly the COO. Her expression was careful, respectful, but unsure. "Mr. Marks," she began, "thank you for coming. The situation you've uncovered is unprecedented, and the full extent of the fraud appears to be even worse than initial reports." I didn't speak. I waited. Karen looked down at the folder I had placed on the table. The forensic team estimates that nearly $5.2 million was diverted over the past 3 years. Criminal charges have been filed. The board has acted swiftly to clean house. She looked toward Alan Kim, who gave a small nod. Then Karen said the words I never expected to hear. "We'd like to offer you a new position, Chief Information Security Officer. Full executive status. You'd report directly to the board. Oversight of all technology and financial systems." I opened the folder. Inside were my conditions. Karen scanned the page, her eyebrows lifting slightly. Full audit authority across all departments. Independent cybersecurity budget. Veto power on financial technology purchases. I nodded. "This is what's necessary if you want to prevent something like this from happening again." She looked at the others. The room was silent. "This is unusual," she said carefully. "So was embezzling over $5 million, I replied. And that happened because no one was watching. You could hear the shift in the room. The mood hardened, not against me, but in my favor. They didn't see a disgruntled employee anymore. They saw the firewall they never knew they needed. "You have until noon," I added. "I have other offers." At 11:47, They called me. Every condition accepted. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office, overlooking the Cleveland skyline. The view was nothing special, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from discarded to indispensable on my own terms. Greg Wilcox had pled guilty. He was cooperating for a reduced sentence. Leon Harris was fighting the charges, claiming ignorance. And Trevor Shields? Fled to Brazil. They were already working on extradition. Most of the stolen funds had been recovered, enough to stabilize the company. The IT department now reported to me directly. I promoted Stephen to lead daily operations. He had the mind. He just needed someone to see it. That afternoon, Andrea walked into my office. "Lunch?" she asked, smiling. "Let's go," I said, grabbing my jacket. As we passed through the floor, conversations paused. Not out of fear, but respect. They all knew. I could have destroyed the company. Instead, I saved it. Outside, the sun was bright, the breeze steady. My phone buzzed. "Alan Kim. Board just approved your security budget increase. Unanimous vote." I smiled and slid the phone back into my pocket. Some bridges collapse under the weight of greed. Others, once rebuilt, they hold everything together. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that silence doesn't mean weakness, and loyalty should never come at the cost of self-preservation. I gave 17 years to a company that discarded me without hesitation. But instead of reacting with rage, I responded with patience, precision, and purpose. For those of us later in life, we often think it's too late to fight back, too late to start again. It's not. The world changes fast, and so must we. Keep your records. Know your systems. Watch the patterns. Age gives us clarity, wisdom, and the ability to see what others overlook. When betrayal comes, and it will, it's not about revenge. It's about standing tall in truth. I didn't just expose a fraud. I reclaimed my worth, rebuilt my career, and walked back in with my head high. Sometimes, the best justice isn't loud. It's calm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore.